Do you think Vikings were just tough warriors who ignored the cold? In fact, they lived in conditions that would kill modern people in days. When we see Vikings in movies, they seem unbothered by winter, wearing minimal clothing, living in simple huts. But the reality was quite different. Real Viking settlements were frozen lands where temperatures plummeted to deadly levels and winter nights lasted 20 hours. How did people survive in such conditions? How did they keep warm, sleep, and work in these ice kingdoms? They had secrets that we have forgotten. Survival techniques in the cold that worked without electricity or modern heating. Today, we will reveal 10 ingenious ways that Vikings transformed frozen wastelands into livable settlements. Watch until the end. The last method is so effective that it could heat an entire longhouse with biological engineering alone. The main and most common method of Viking cold weather survival was layered wool clothing. This was not random fashion. It was precisely calculated thermal engineering using natural materials. Vikings understood that the battle against cold is won not by generating heat, but by refusing to lose it. The foundation of all Viking clothing was wool, not just any wool. Specially prepared sheep's wool that retained its natural lanolin. This waxy coating made Viking wool naturally water-resistant. Even when wet, wool continued insulating. This property alone saved countless lives. A typical Viking wore not 1 or 2 layers, but 7 to 8 layers of clothing. Each layer served a specific purpose. The first layer against the skin was always linen, a long shirt that wicked away sweat, preventing dangerous moisture buildup that could lead to hypothermia. Over this came the first wool layer, a knee-length tunic, thick as your thumb, with long sleeves. The second wool layer was heavier still, another tunic, often reinforced at chest and back. Then came woolen trousers, not tight like modern pants, but loose enough to trap air between fabric and skin. Air pockets were everything. Each gap between layers created insulation chambers that held body heat. This principle is still used in modern mountaineering equipment. Next came the outer cloak. Viking cloaks were massive sheets of the thickest wool, sometimes weighing 20 pounds when dry. Wealthy Vikings lined their cloaks with fur. But here is what most people do not know. They wore the fur on the inside, against their bodies, not outside for show. Beaver fur was especially prized because it trapped heat better than any other material available. Vikings knew that up to 40% of body heat escapes through the head, so even indoors, they wore woolen caps or hoods. Real Viking headwear was practical. Thick wool caps with ear flaps, sometimes lined with rabbit fur. Footwear deserves special attention. Viking boots started with multiple pairs of thick woolen socks. Over the socks came leather boots, treated with animal fats. This waterproofing was constantly reapplied throughout winter. Inside the boots, Vikings stuffed dried grass or moss for additional insulation. Hands required similar protection. First came thin wool gloves, fitting snugly against the fingers. Over these, leather mittens. Mittens, not gloves, because keeping fingers together shared warmth better than separating them. Thus, layered wool clothing became the first line of defense. Without it, even the strongest warrior would freeze. It was not toughness that kept Vikings alive. It was wool. The second way Vikings kept warm was through sophisticated house construction. Viking longhouses were not primitive huts. They were thermal engineering systems designed to trap every precious calorie of heat. Longhouses ranged from 15 to 75 meters long. That is 50 to over 200 feet. Width stayed consistent at 5 to 7 meters. This narrow, elongated shape was not arbitrary. It was deliberate thermal design. The walls were constructed from vertical timber posts sunk deep into the ground. Between these posts, builders wove horizontal branches, then plastered both sides with daub, a mixture of clay, straw, animal dung, and sand. This created walls nearly a meter thick in some places. But here is the genius. This was not solid wall. The construction trapped thousands of air pockets within the wall structure itself. These microscopic air chambers acted like ancient insulation, dramatically slowing heat loss. In regions where timber was scarce, like Iceland or Greenland, Vikings built with turf, carefully cut blocks of earth with grass roots still attached. These turf blocks were stacked like bricks, sometimes creating walls over 2 meters thick. Modern thermal imaging of reconstructed turf longhouses shows they maintain interior temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than outside, even with minimal heating. The roof was equally ingenious. A steep pitch necessary to shed heavy snow, supported by 2 rows of interior posts. The roof itself was thatched with reed, straw, or turf, sometimes all 3, in layers. The thatch had to be thick. Half a meter deep was common. But wait, no chimney. Viking longhouses had no chimneys. Instead, they had smoke holes in the roof ridge. These could be partially covered or fully opened using movable wooden covers controlled by poles from inside. The smoke rose naturally, drawn upward by the heat of the central fire. Before exiting through the roof hole, it traveled slowly along the underside of the thatch, depositing warmth into the roofing material. This turned the entire roof into a radiant heat panel. Inside the longhouse, the floor was typically packed earth. Vikings scattered fresh straw over the floor every week, sometimes layering it a foot deep. This straw mat acted as insulation from the frozen ground below. The sleeping areas ran along both long walls of the house. Raised platforms, typically a meter wide and half a meter off the floor. Why raised? Because cold air sinks. By sleeping even slightly elevated, Vikings avoided the coldest air layer. Heavy wool or leather curtains hung from ceiling beams, completely enclosing the sleeping area. This created a room within a room, a microclimate that trapped body heat incredibly effectively. Archaeological evidence demonstrates these principles beautifully. With a single hearth fire burning and 12 people sleeping in curtained beds, interior temperatures reached 18 to 20 degrees, comfortable by any standard, while outside temperatures hovered around -15. Thus, the longhouse itself was a survival tool, not just shelter. The third way Vikings kept warm was the central hearth. This was not just a fireplace, it was the literal and spiritual heart of Viking life. The difference between survival and death. The hearth sat in the exact center of the longhouse, positioned perfectly to distribute heat evenly throughout the structure. Unlike fireplaces built into walls, a central hearth radiated heat in all directions. Everyone benefited equally. Construction of a proper hearth required skill. Vikings dug a shallow pit, usually circular or oval, about 2 meters across. They lined this pit with flat stones chosen for specific thermal properties. Soapstone was highly prized because it absorbed heat slowly and released it even more slowly, acting as a thermal battery. Around this stone-lined pit, they built up a low wall of more stones, perhaps 30 centimeters high. This contained the fire while allowing heat radiation. The stones themselves became hot enough to continue warming the house for hours after flames died down. The fire burned continuously from autumn to spring. Letting the hearth fire die completely was considered terrible luck, possibly a curse. Families assigned the task of tending the fire to specific members. Through the night, someone woke every few hours to add wood and ensure flames never failed. Modern reconstructions with period-accurate fires show that a well-tended Viking hearth could raise the temperature in a 30-meter longhouse from outside freezing to a comfortable 18 degrees throughout the entire interior space. But the hearth served multiple purposes beyond warmth. It was the kitchen. All cooking happened here. Large iron cauldrons hung from chains suspended from ceiling beams. Stews and soups bubbled constantly. The hearth also provided light. For most of winter, when daylight lasted only a few hours, the hearth fire was the primary light source. Socially, the hearth was where the family gathered. After evening meal, people drew close to the fire for warmth and companionship. Perhaps most remarkably, the hearth had spiritual significance. It was associated with the goddess Frigga, wife of Odin. The hearth fire was sacred, a connection to divine forces. This reverence for fire was not superstition. It was respect born from absolute dependence. Without the hearth fire, even the best-built longhouse was just an expensive tomb. The fourth way Vikings kept warm was using hot stones for portable heating. This method was brilliantly simple, yet incredibly effective. Smooth river stones were carefully selected. Vikings avoided any with cracks or flaws. Why? Because a flawed stone, when heated, could explode violently. Good stones were precious. Families kept collections of proven stones, marked and stored specifically for heating purposes. To heat them, stones were buried in the hot coals of the hearth fire for 2 to 3 hours. When ready, they glowed with stored heat. Using iron tongs or wooden handles, someone would extract a hot stone and wrap it immediately in thick wool cloth or sheepskin. A properly wrapped stone weighing 2 to 3 kilograms retained usable heat for 6 to 8 hours. Think about that. 8 hours of warmth from nothing but a rock and fire. The most common use was bed warming. An hour before sleep, servants, or in poorer families, children, placed hot stones wrapped in fabric beneath the sleeping furs. When family members finally climbed into bed, the stones had warmed the entire sleeping area. Nothing is more miserable than climbing into an ice-cold bed in a freezing room. Vikings eliminated this problem entirely with preheated beds. Foot warmers deserve special mention. Stone floors, even covered with straw, remained cold. Vikings who worked sedentary jobs needed warm feet to stay comfortable. They developed wooden boxes with air holes. Hot stones went inside these boxes. You placed your feet on or near this box, and rising heat kept them warm for hours. Heated stones had another crucial use: treating injuries and illness. Vikings placed hot stones wrapped in cloth against sore muscles, arthritic joints, or injured areas. The sustained heat increased blood flow and promoted healing. This ancient technique still works today. Modern survivalists and outdoor enthusiasts have rediscovered heated stones because it requires no modern technology. The fifth way Vikings kept warm was communal sleeping. When all else failed, when the hearth fire burned low and the cold pressed in like a physical weight, Vikings had one final defense: each other. In a typical Viking household, sleeping arrangements bore no resemblance to modern bedrooms. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford when temperatures plunged below freezing. A single large bed, often 3 meters wide and 2.5 meters long, accommodated 6 to 8 people. Parents, children, grandparents, servants, even guests, all packed together under layers of wool blankets and fur pelts. The human body generates approximately 100 watts of heat at rest. 8 people in one bed produced 800 watts, equivalent to a modern space heater running continuously. This is not poetic metaphor. It is thermodynamics. The arrangement followed strict logic. Children always slept between adults, receiving heat from both sides. The very young and the elderly occupied the center positions where temperature was highest and most stable. Strong young adults took the edges, acting as thermal barriers, protecting others from cold air seeping through walls. The beds themselves were engineering marvels of insulation. The base was usually a wooden platform raised off the floor. Remember, cold air sinks. On this platform, a thick layer of dried heather, straw, or marsh grass. Over that, multiple sheepskin with the wool side up. Then, woolen blankets, stacked 3 or 4 deep. The sleepers climbed in, fully clothed in their indoor wear. Over everyone went more wool blankets and fur pelts. The heaviest furs, bear, wolf, reindeer with winter coat, went on top as the final insulating layer. Hanging from ceiling beams, thick wool curtains enclosed the entire bed. These curtains were crucial. They trapped heat radiated by sleeping bodies, creating a microclimate inside the bed that could be 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the room outside. Within 30 minutes, the combined body heat raised the interior temperature to a level where even the coldest sleepers felt comfortable. The layers of fabric and fur trapped this warmth, and it built throughout the night. By morning, the inside of a well-populated Viking bed could feel genuinely warm, almost hot. This is why Vikings could wake and face their day without the shock of cold that would otherwise make rising almost impossible. Thus, communal sleeping was not just tradition, it was vital means of survival. People became living hot water bottles for each other. The sixth way Vikings kept warm was through strategic diet. Cold weather demands fuel, and food is fuel. Viking winter diet was specifically calibrated to generate maximum internal heat. The cornerstone of winter nutrition was fat. Not lean protein, not carbohydrates, fat. Pure, calorie-dense animal fat. Why? Because fat generates twice the calories per gram compared to protein or carbs. Vikings empowered extraordinary amounts of fat by modern standards. Butter was eaten by the spoonful. Rendered animal fat, lard from pigs, tallow from cattle and sheep, was added to every meal. Fatty meat cuts that we would trim away today were considered the choicest portions. Breakfast started the day with fatty porridge. Not modern oatmeal with skim milk. Viking porridge was grain cooked in whole milk or cream, liberally enriched with butter, and sometimes stirred with pieces of fatty pork or bacon. The midday meal centered on stews. Viking winter stews were legendary. Thick, fatty, slow-cooked concoctions that simmered for hours. Into the cauldron went chunks of mutton, beef, or pork, deliberately chosen for their fat content. Bones with marrow. Root vegetables. Legumes. These stews were not just food, they were thermal generators. Eating a bowl of hot stew raised your core body temperature measurably. You could feel it spreading through your chest and limbs. Fish was absolutely critical, especially for coastal Vikings. But not just any fish. Fatty fish, salmon, herring, Mackerel. These cold water species are loaded with oils. Preserved fish was a winter staple. Dried cod was beaten until soft, then rehydrated and cooked with butter or cream. Salted herring was soaked to remove excess salt, then fried in fat. Dairy products were consumed in astonishing quantities. Milk, butter, cheese, skyr. That thick, tangy, cultured dairy product, similar to Greek yogurt. Butter was so important that it was sometimes buried in peat bogs for preservation. Hot drinks were crucial. Warm milk with honey, hot herbal teas, even heated ale. Consuming hot liquids raised body temperature immediately and provided psychological comfort. The evening meal was the largest and fattiest of the day. Families gathered around the hearth for roasted meat dripping with fat, more stew, bread soaked in meat drippings, and dairy products. This massive caloric intake right before the long night provided fuel for the body to generate heat during sleep. A working Viking man might consume 4,000 to 5,000 calories daily in winter, nearly double modern recommendations. But they burned those calories keeping warm and performing hard physical labor. Vikings understood that in winter, your body is a furnace. Feed the furnace, stay warm. Let the furnace run low, and you die. It is that simple. The seventh way Vikings kept warm was through bathhouses and heat therapy. Vikings had a secret weapon that combined hygiene, medicine, and social bonding. The bathhouse. These were not luxuries. They were essential infrastructure for maintaining health through long winters. Viking bathhouses were separate structures built specifically for bathing and heat therapy. Inside a bathhouse, stones were heated in a fire until they glowed red. Water was then thrown onto these superheated stones, creating explosive bursts of steam that raised the interior temperature to levels that would seem unbearable, often exceeding 50 degrees. Why subject yourself to this? Because controlled heat exposure had multiple benefits Vikings understood intuitively. First, the intense heat opened pores and promoted sweating, which cleaned the skin far more thoroughly than simple water bathing. In an era when most people bathed infrequently, this deep cleaning helped prevent skin infections and parasites. Second, the heat increased blood circulation dramatically. Cold weather causes blood vessels to constrict, reducing circulation to extremities. This makes you more susceptible to frostbite and slows healing of injuries. The bathhouse reversed this, flooding limbs with warm blood. Third, the heat exposure seems to have boosted immune function. People who used bathhouses regularly reportedly got sick less often, something modern research on sauna use confirms. After spending time in the intense heat, Vikings would sometimes rush outside and roll in snow or plunge into cold water. This contrast therapy, intense heat followed by extreme cold, was believed to toughen the body and improve health. Modern sports medicine has rediscovered this. Contrast therapy, alternating hot and cold exposure, reduces inflammation, speeds recovery, and may improve cold tolerance. Bathhouses were not used daily. Heating them required too much fuel, but weekly or bi-weekly bathing sessions were common, even in winter. The fuel investment was considered worthwhile for the health benefits. Modern Scandinavian sauna culture descends directly from these Viking practices. The sauna is not just recreation, it is cultural heritage, a 1,000-year-old tradition of using heat strategically to survive in northern climates. The eighth way Vikings kept warm was through constant physical activity. Medieval people could not afford to sit idle because any inactivity meant rapid cooling of the body and the risk of illness. Movement was a natural way to maintain body temperature. Morning exercises became a real ritual. Immediately after waking up, Vikings performed warm-up movements, squats, bends, arm swings, brisk walking, or running in place. Such activities helped to get the blood flowing and warm up the muscles. Physical labor permeated everyday life. Servants carried water from the well, firewood from the yard, and food from storage. Women washed clothes, spun yarn, prepared food, and cleaned. All this prevented the body from freezing and created a feeling of warmth without fire or blankets. Combat training for warriors continued even in winter. Heavy armor, prolonged weapon exercises, running and wrestling caused a strong rush of blood, which made the warriors hardened. Training was both a school of endurance and a way to warm up through force. Working outside in winter also had a warming effect. Men chopped wood, cleared snow, tended to animals, and hunted in the forest. All these activities not only supported the household, but also provided natural warmth for the body. Dancing served a dual purpose, entertainment and warmth. In the evenings, communal gatherings were held. People spun, jumped, clapped their hands, and sang. It was a joyful event that turned into a real heater for all participants. Children had warming games, wrestling, rolling, running around. These active entertainments kept them from freezing and trained their bodies to resist cold through constant activity. Thus, constant physical activity was not just a habit, but a fundamental strategy for survival. Every step, every effort, every dance turned into a small heater, without which Vikings would quickly freeze. The ninth way Vikings kept warm was through living with livestock. Vikings practiced something that sounds strange to modern ears. They lived with their farm animals. Not near them, with them, in the same building. A typical Viking longhouse often included a livestock section at one end, sometimes separated by a partial wall, sometimes just a designated area with stalls. Either way, cows, sheep, goats, sometimes even horses, spent winter living under the same roof as their human owners. Consider the heat output. A single cow generates approximately 1,000 watts of heat, as much as a large space heater running continuously. That cow never turns off. Day and night, it is producing warmth. A typical small farm might house 6 to 8 cows, 10 to 12 sheep, several goats, and some chickens. The combined heat output of these animals exceeded 6,000 watts, more than most modern central heating systems provide. This heat did not stay isolated in the animal area. The longhouse design ensured warmth spread throughout the structure. Hot air rises, traveling along the interior roof space and radiating down into human living areas. The animals essentially functioned as a biological furnace. The animals also produce insulation. Straw bedding for livestock absorbed waste and needed frequent replacement. This used straw, mixed with animal waste and trampled down, created a fermenting mass that generated additional heat through decomposition. The arrangement had multiple other advantages beyond heating. Livestock were protected from winter weather and predators. This increased survival rates significantly. Animals that might freeze or be killed outdoors came through winter healthy. It also made animal care much easier. Feeding, milking, checking on pregnant animals, dealing with births. All could be done without venturing into deadly cold. Milk production continued through winter because cows stayed warm and stress-free. This provided fresh dairy products even in the dead of winter when preserved food was the only other option. Dogs always lived with humans, sleeping near or even in beds. Cats were welcomed for pest control and companionship. They naturally sought the warmest spots, often ending up cuddled with sleeping people. For Vikings, the decision to live with animals was not about hygiene or comfort. It was about survival. The animals were partners in the battle against cold, living, breathing heaters that asked for nothing but food and shelter in return. The 10th and most important way Vikings kept warm was through skiing and winter mobility. Vikings were not trapped by snow. They conquered it. Viking skis were hand-carved from single pieces of wood, typically pine, ash, or birch. They were long, often 3 meters, and surprisingly narrow. The front curved upward dramatically to ride over powder snow. They were often asymmetric. One ski, the gliding ski, was long and smooth, designed for cruising. The other, the kicking ski, was shorter and sometimes covered with fur, providing grip for pushing forward. Vikings used a single pole, not 2 like modern skiers. This long pole, often taller than the skier, served multiple purposes: balance, steering, braking, even as a weapon or support for hunting activities. Why was skiing so crucial? Because winter in Scandinavia meant meters of snow covering everything. Walking through this snow was exhausting. You would sink to your waist with every step. A journey that took an hour on bare ground took a full day in deep snow. On skis, that same journey took only slightly longer than summer travel. Skis distributed weight across a large surface area, allowing you to glide across snow instead of sinking through it. Energy efficiency improved dramatically. This mattered for survival. Checking trap lines for fur-bearing animals, traveling between settlements to trade or visit family, hunting winter game, gathering firewood from distant forests. All of these essential winter activities required mobility that was only possible on skis. Vikings became such accomplished skiers that they even had a god of skiing, Uller. According to mythology, Uller was so skilled on skis that no one could compete with him. He was also a warrior god and a hunter. The practical applications of skiing were numerous. Hunters on skis could pursue game through deep snow where the animals struggled. This gave Vikings a massive advantage. Elk, reindeer, deer. These animals floundered in deep powder. A skilled hunter on skis could run them down. The movement itself generated heat. Vigorous skiing is aerobic exercise that raises core body temperature significantly. Vikings who might be dangerously cold while sitting still could warm up completely by skiing hard for 30 minutes. This was deliberately used as a warming strategy. Feeling chilled? Go outside and ski vigorously until you break a sweat. Come back indoors glowing with warmth. The heat generated by exercise could keep you warm for hours afterward. For Vikings, skiing was not optional. It was the difference between winter isolation and winter mobility, between starving and finding food, between freezing and generating life-saving heat through movement. Medieval castles were cold stone prisons, but Viking settlements were equally harsh. Yet Vikings did not simply endure the cold. They created a whole system of survival in deadly conditions. Each of the 10 ways of staying warm was part of an overall strategy. Layered wool clothing warmed bodies. Sophisticated longhouses trapped heat. Central hearths provided continuous warmth. Hot stones warmed beds. Communal sleeping turned people into living heaters. High-fat diets fueled internal fires. Bathhouses boosted circulation. Constant activity generated heat. Livestock served as biological furnaces. And skiing provided winter mobility. These cold weather survival techniques worked without electricity, gas, or modern heaters. Vikings relied on fire, natural materials, their own ingenuity, and mutual assistance. Many of these methods can still be used today. In the event of heating failure, at a cottage without power, or in camping conditions, Viking secrets of warmth can save you from freezing. The main lesson from Viking experience is that heat must be created, preserved, and distributed. One source is not enough. You need a system of many small solutions that work together. Modern people have forgotten how to survive in the cold without technology. But Viking experience shows that people can live comfortably even in the harshest conditions if they know the right ways to keep warm. Vikings were not just tough warriors. They were sophisticated engineers who solved complex thermodynamic problems with remarkable elegance. Their survival system worked perfectly for thousands of years, using only what nature provided and human intelligence. Which of the Viking heating methods did you find most practical? Have you tried to keep warm without modern heating? Could you survive a week in Viking conditions using what you learned today? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this video opened your eyes to the incredible ingenuity of Viking survival strategies, then subscribe to Brave Viking Stories right now. We are not here to romanticize the past. We are here to reveal the truth. The real techniques, the actual science behind Viking survival. Knowledge that sustained entire civilizations in conditions we consider impossible. Hit that subscribe button. Smash the like if this video taught you something valuable. Share it with anyone who needs to understand that our ancestors were not primitive. They were brilliant. The winter survival strategies of Vikings represent some of humanity's finest achievements, not because they were flashy, but because they worked perfectly, using only natural materials and deep understanding. Join us at Brave Viking Stories as we continue uncovering these incredible stories. The wisdom is there. We just have to be willing to listen and learn. Subscribe to Brave Viking Stories. We will see you in the next one.